Posted by you/colonial83. Reddit, what is your r/no-sleep story that happened? We moved into a new house a few months ago. As we were in the process of purchasing the house, the renter who was living in it died unexpectedly of natural causes in his mid-40s. He died right in the middle of the living room. Shortly after, we move into the house, and almost immediately our 2-year-old daughter starts talking about the ghost that lives in our house. Now let's be real here, she is 2 and 2-year-olds are very impressionable. Halloween had recently passed, and she had this Halloween-themed picture book that she loved to read, so it's entirely possible that all this talk of ghosts was just coming from looking through that book on a regular basis. Still, she was always telling me that the ghost was in her playhouse in the basement, that the ghost was on the stairs, or that the ghost was standing in the corner. She never seemed to be afraid of the ghost, and considered him to be her friend, so I wasn't all that concerned even if there was a ghost haunting our house. If he's a nice and helpful ghost, it could certainly be a lot worse. I would often tell the ghost that he was welcome to stay if he wanted to, but he was also welcome to go if that would make him happier. I was about 30-70 on the ghost being real and she could see and talk to him versus the ghost being just her imagination fueled by her Halloween book. Until one day, when we were going out to the car to go to daycare in the morning. It was still dark out, and rainy. My daughter told me that the ghost was on the back deck, and then she told me that today was the ghost's birthday and she wanted to sing him happy birthday. Once again, I mostly disregarded what she was saying, as she is birthday obsessed and has in the past made us sing happy birthday to Mickey Mouse, a bowl of fruit snacks, and the bathroom. So we sang and wished the ghost a happy birthday and went on with our lives. Later that day, out of pure curiosity, I looked up the obituary of the man who had died in our house. And wouldn't you know it? It was his fucking birthday. My bedroom is on the second floor of the house. There's no patio/porch/overhang of any kind beneath my windows. A couple of years ago I was watching TV in bed around 2 a.m. and heard a louder than usual animal sound. Not uncommon to hear squirrels running around on the roof from time to time. Didn't think much of it. Kept on happening, and started to sound close to the window and not on the roof. I ignored it for a pretty long time. After at least 40 to 45 minutes of being irritated by the noise, best guess, I had watched a couple of episodes of South Park on my DVR during the time span. I banged on the wall in hopes of scaring them off until I could get to sleep. Just 2 quick bangs with my fist. Which were answered with 2 bangs on the wall right next to the window from outside. Needless to say, I just about shit and jumped out of bed. Now, my living room has a bay window and is on the other end of the house, so I could look out that window from the side and see my bedroom window. I hustle downstairs and peek out. I see a guy standing in front of my house, below my bedroom window. He's got a knife, a small pocket knife, in his hand, and he's petting the front of my house. Call the police and wait. He never leaves the front of the house even when they roll up and ultimately disarm and arrest him without much struggle. I was about 19 living with a roommate going to college while living in an apartment complex. Occasionally I get mild bouts of insomnia but nothing serious, usually just a delay in my bedtime of an extra 2 or 3 hours. One night I suddenly just cannot sleep. Nothing will get me to relax and I eventually give up and just sit in the front room playing Heavy Rain all night as it had just come out a few days ago. The next day when I head off to work exhausted from 0 hours of sleep I got a text from my roommate. Dude, the police are all over the apartment complex. 9 apartments including our downstairs neighbor were broken into last night with people home sleeping. Some people even reported things being stolen from the rooms they were sleeping in. It hit me that had I not stayed up all night and left the light on in the front room I would have been robbed or worse. It was winter break, my freshman year of college. I drove up to visit one of my friends in northwestern Pennsylvania for New Year. I needed to be back home the next day for work, so I decided to drive back at like 2 a.m. I was driving down Interstate 79, for anyone reading this from PA, it was around Grove City where this event took place, and I maybe saw 2 cars in a 60-mile span. I came up around a bend and saw what looked like a black bear in my lane and I swerved and went off the road and crashed into the tree line next to the highway. I was in the middle of nowhere and the bear just booked it into the woods. My car was fucking totaled and I knew I wasn't gonna see any cars for hours to help me out. I called 911 and they said they would come in like 20 minutes. I got out of the car and stood up on the shoulder of the highway and waited. After about 5 minutes I heard some rustling in the bushes and there it was, the fucking bear. Turns out that when I went off the road I hit a cub and mama bear was pissed as all hell. I booked it over to the back of the car and hopped in the trunk. Thank God I had a big Ford Expedition so the bear couldn't fuck with it too much. For another half an hour the bear tried ramming the car and was trying to get at me in a frenzy. The police showed up and the sirens scared Mama Bear off into the woods again. It was the most terrifying experience of my life. Posted this before, but it's one of my family's favorite stories. My uncle called my mom one morning and told her this: "I have 4 little cousins who never got to meet my grandfather. He passed before they were born." One morning, they ran downstairs for breakfast as they usually do. As my uncle was getting their food ready, one pointed to the fridge and said, "That's him." My uncle, not thinking much of it, said, "Who?" and looked over. They were pointing at a picture of my grandfather that they never got to meet. My cousin responded, "The man that comes and talks to us at night until we fall asleep sometimes." I've posted this before in a similar thread. For reference, this happened a few months ago. Like most couples, my husband and I have a designated side of the bed. I sleep on the right and he on the left. My comfortable sleep position is laying on my left side and facing the window, away from him. He alternates between facing the bathroom door or me. One night a few weeks back, I'm fighting my sleep. I'm laying on my left side, per the norm, but I just can't get comfortable. My neck is sort of sore from laying on my left, so I turn over and face my husband. When I turn over, I am not only faced with my husband's back, but with a large shadow standing over him. Immediately the shadow stretches to me and somehow communicates for me to turn over. I remember thinking its face was contorted, somehow expressing malice. But I can't for the life of me remember what it looked like. I didn't hear a voice, but the communication was urgent and angry. Like it wanted to hurt me. Without thinking, I turn back around and quickly fall asleep. To be honest, I'm not even sure if I was dreaming. The next morning, my husband and I woke up around the same time and go about our usual routine. I don't say anything because my husband doesn't like to talk about supernatural stuff or the like, which I felt it was. However, this morning is strange and he seems to be uncomfortable. After a lot of prodding, he finally admits he had an awful nightmare. He dreamt a demon was trying to make him do things while he was sleeping, really evil shit, wouldn't elaborate, and I woke up during this and the demon attacked me. I didn't tell my husband that I remember the same thing, only I wasn't sure if I was asleep. I work in a small building with 3 wings and my office is located in a little back hallway of one of the wings. I share the office with another girl and it's usually pretty quiet. One evening she and I were the only ones in our wing still there and we both heard a door loudly shut in the hallway. We were both a bit confused and, upon peeking out, I noticed nothing out of the ordinary. For the next 2 weeks, I was staying late to catch up on hours so I could have a winter break, and I began noticing little noises in the hallway when I was positive nobody was in the building. It sounded like a shoe sliding on the floor. This happened a couple of times. Earlier in the evenings, it would just be me and the janitor, and she started getting spooked. She said she heard doors slamming in one of the wings even though everybody had left. We investigated one night to find that all of the doors were properly locked, but I noticed that the kitchen light was on, even though the door was locked. The janitor freaked out because she knew she'd turned the light off before locking the door. I also recalled the light being on a couple of nights when I was the only one there. I started to ask around if other people in the building had experienced anything weird like that, and one lady said some of her room decorations would have moved when she came back from the bathroom. And here's the one that creeps me out. Another lady said that one day she noticed a footprint in the middle of her desk. It's that black material that shows skin prints pretty easily. To be honest, I'd rather it be paranormal stuff, because the idea that a person is doing all this creeps me out. TLDR, a mild white-collar paranormal activity. I lived in an apartment a few years ago. 4 units upstairs, 4 units downstairs. I lived upstairs, and the apartment below me was vacant. I kept hearing footsteps through the apartment, and I knew I shouldn't have. Nobody was downstairs. I asked someone to come over and listen, just to see if I was crazy. Maybe I'm just hearing other apartments since it's empty downstairs, and everything is echoing. Wrong. I kept hearing the footsteps. This went on for a solid hour. Finally, I called the landlord and the police. Someone had broken in through the windows downstairs and was walking back and forth through the apartment with a knife. Fucking horrifying. Kind of a no sleep for a short while. One Halloween a couple of groups from the neighborhood got into an egg fight. None of us hated each other, just in different cliques. As the opposing forces started to march forward, we took off running to retreat to a safer distance. As we entered the woods, I quickly bolted behind a tree and everyone from the opposing side passed me by. Or at least I thought. Bill got caught by a branch and was trying to free himself. I got from behind the tree to give him a hand since he was having a hard time. Right as I got to him, he looked up and our eyes locked. He had a true look of horror in his eyes. I asked him if he needed some help and he muttered very lowly, "Yeah. Sure," so we got him loose and I ran off to rejoin the fight. The next day in school someone walked up and said, "Is what Bill said true?" Being a smartass, yup, and walked off. Then it happened a second time, then a third and fourth. I responded yup each time. I'd be lying if I didn't say that I was curious as to what they were talking about, but I just played along since everyone asked it the same way. As if they are finding out that ghosts do exist. So at lunch, I see Bill walk up and say, "Hey Bill, I have a question." He mutters lowly, "Yeah, what?" I respond, "Why is everyone asking me if what you said is true?" He said, "Okay, it was the weirdest thing. You weren't there. Next thing I know you are standing in front of me. You just appeared out of thin air. I know there must be an explanation, but dude, you were not there." "I know you weren't." I laughed and told him I was behind the tree and saw that he was stuck and just stepped out to help. He puts his hand on my shoulder and breathes a sigh of relief. He said, "Jesus Christ, I was scared to death. I've been telling the story to see if anyone else had this happen with you for a while. I could disappear and appear randomly." I was living in Fort Wayne, Indiana for a short time, and the house I stayed in was on the outskirts of the main city, set way back on a dirt road in Farmville. The house is over 200 years old and I would routinely freak myself out because of the age, location, and my only other roommates were two cats. Anyways, during one of the coldest nights in January, -15°F, I heard someone frantically ringing my doorbell at 2:30 to 3 a.m. Slowly approached the door to get a glimpse of my unexpected company before they realized I could see them. Suddenly I heard them thump across the wooden, wrap-around deck leading up to the front door and make their way to the big glass side door. I heard a moan/groan. I heard someone jiggle the door knob. By this time I am calling the cops and cowering in my room with my pistol drawn. During the 25 minutes it took for the cops to make their way up there to investigate, I could hear and see the shadows of people outside each window, trying to see if it slid open. When the cops arrived, they walked around the house and only identified one set of footprints in the snow. And one set of drag marks. Also they could identify where and when the person being dragged was seated down in the snow at various entry points while the other guy was checking for a way in. Moved shortly after, not because of the attempted entry but because Fort Wayne, Indiana is a terrible place to live. One I posted nearly a year ago that could do with dusting off. Quite a few years ago now I found myself working at a historical jail, prison museum for you USA types, as a guide/administrator. This place was one of the oldest buildings in town and had quite the reputation amongst ghost hunters, so it was always spooky working there. The early days had been fairly violent and there had been a few deaths including state-ordered hangings, so there were plenty of ghostly stories passed around. While I did see some very odd things during my time there, the building was old, a haven for local wildlife and far from windproof, so any stories had to be taken with a grain of salt. We also had several dozen mannequins set up in traditional poses, a few gathered in the courtyard, some in the cells, and it was always fun to hear the gasps from the tourists when they saw the first one looming in the hallway. Now to the story. As this was primarily a tourist town, the winter months were quite quiet and I could go hours without seeing another person. One day, I had lucked out and managed to get a late closing one night and an early morning opening the next day. Both closing and opening required a torch as it was pitch black at this time of year and lights were not installed throughout the entire complex. I had only had one tourist the entire day, so, to defeat boredom, I decided to take one of the surplus mannequins from the storeroom, dress them in some early convict ladies' garb, and set them up in the kitchen in the ladies' wing. I decided I would set them up facing away from the door, holding a bowl in one arm and an egg beater in the other. I made sure everything was very sturdy and closed the kitchen up for the night. The next morning I arrived at 6 a.m. to open up and was making my way through the complex when I heard something strange. The room I was in shared a wall with the kitchens and there was an odd, scraping noise coming from the other side of the wall. As I stood there listening in the dark, it stopped. Started again. Then intensified, accompanied by a tapping noise. A little freaked out, I continued around the building. It was set up in a circular shape with rooms on the inside, making my way slowly toward the kitchens. As I stood outside the door I could hear this irregular noise quite clearly and decided to use the sliding hatch on the door to look into the room first. The mannequin was moving. Not just moving slightly, but quite visibly tapping one foot up and down as it slowly turned the egg beater, its arms raising and lowering. As my eyes adjusted to the dark my brain started to process what I was seeing. Whether possession or poltergeist, I was not sticking around for this thing to turn around. I slammed that hatch closed and hightailed it back the way I came, not stopping until I reached the main office where I promptly bolted the door and turned on every light I could find. At around 10 a.m. we had our first tourist come through the doors. I had convinced myself by this point that sure what I had seen had been some sort of hallucination. I must have heard the building settling and my brain filled in the rest. It was dark after all. Knowing I would have to open the kitchen for the tourist to pass through, I hung the back in 5 minutes sign on the front desk and snuck quietly towards the kitchen door. I slowly opened the hatch and peered in to see the mannequin standing in the same position that I had left it, not moving. With everything back to normal, I breathed a very deep sigh of relief and opened the door. The second I opened the door, the mannequin began to mix the egg beater, frantically tapping its foot. I have never been more terrified than at that moment. It was broad daylight, and I couldn't convince myself nothing was happening this time. It was happening right in front of me. I was alone in jail with a possessed mannequin, and I was the only authority figure with an innocent member of the public soon to be coming through this very room. What the hell was I supposed to do in this situation? I remember thinking it's only plaster and paper mache. Just kill it. Smash it quickly, run like hell and never come back. As I picked up a meat mallet and walked, extremely hesitantly towards the thing. As I got closer, it began moving quicker until I was within reaching distance. Fully expecting this thing to turn around and bury the egg beater in my chest, I grabbed a hold of its arm only to have the mannequin erupt into a terrible, croaking, hissing noise. I near crapped myself at this point, but something about the hissing sounded surprisingly familiar. Gaining some composure, I looked into the bowl the mannequin was holding in its other arm. Looking up at me, with its head stuck firmly between the beaters, was a king skink, about 40 centimeters long. I took my hand off the mannequin's arm and the skink began to run. Stuck as it was, it ran around in circles in the bottom of the bowl, which turned the beater attached to the mannequin's arm, which proceeded to move up and down and cause the whole thing to vibrate, tapping its foot on the ground. 5 minutes later, I was letting the poor guy go in the courtyard while still giggling hysterically to myself, and by the end of that day, that mannequin was packed up and back in storage. Just in case. This story is not mine, it's my grandfather's. Backstory: this takes place in West Virginia in the 1920s. My grandpa is the youngest 9 and his family is very poor. They all live in a one-room house. My grandpa's sister suddenly got sick and quickly fell into a coma. They say she had a fever and would shake and even sit up in the middle of the night even though she was not conscious. She got progressively worse over the next few days and needed some sort of help. My grandpa and his oldest sister Glenna stayed behind while the rest of the family went to the neighbor's house 10 miles down the road for some food and medicine. As soon as the family got home that night, their mom went to the sister's bed and started to put a cold cloth on her head. Immediately her eyes flew open for the first time in days and she looked her mother right in the eyes and said, "The Lord wants Glenna." She fell back and twitched before going back into unconsciousness. The next morning Glenna and the sister died. The younger sister died from the fever, and Glenna died from unknown causes. In 1993, our family lived in a small town called Ritzville, Washington. I was 5 years old at the time, and what I experienced has left me thinking about it every single night for the past 22 years. I shared a room and bunk bed with my little brother. The room had a small, fairly deep closet located a few feet from the foot of the bunk bed. Located on the wall was a small vent that at night, when the living room light was on, would shine through, giving my room a slight ambient glow. Well, one night I had to go to the bathroom, and when I sat up and was about to take the covers off, I noticed that at the foot of the bunk bed was this tall black figure with a giant oval head that spanned the width of the bunk bed staring at me. It had 2 small yellow eyes that were far apart, and I noticed this thing stood around 6 feet tall. Its skin was charcoal and lumpy. I stared at it for a good 5 seconds before I threw the covers over my head. 5 seconds of this monster being ingrained into my head. I could feel the evil surrounding it. I was up for a while before I fell asleep again, so I have no idea how long it was there. In the morning, the first thing I noticed was the closet door. I make it a habit to close closet doors every night, but it was wide open. My mom was the first to know about it, and you know how most parents kind of wave off their kids' experiences as a bad dream? She didn't. She knew I saw something because they've seen things. I had nightmares for weeks after seeing it. In my dreams, this being picked me up and started torturing me. I haven't seen it since, and I never want to see it again. My daughter slept in the bed with me for a few years after her father and I had divorced. Probably ages 3 through 6 or so. My bed was against the wall, and she slept on the side of the wall. I slept on my side facing her, so my bathroom was to my back. We had not fallen asleep yet, but had just been laying there being quiet and still. All of a sudden, she says, "Mommy, why is there a man standing behind you?" My body turned ice cold, and it felt like all of the blood drained out of my body. I finally got up the nerve to turn over and look. There was nobody there. She had said it so seriously, but the little toot was joking. I have never been so scared in my life, and to this day I will not sleep with my back facing that bathroom door. This was 13 years ago. When I was in 5th grade, some guy who was mentally ill had a meltdown somewhere in Chicago. He shot and killed some random guy and stole his car. He drove up I-94 towards my suburb, got off the highway, drove straight into my neighborhood, it's very close to the exit, and just started shooting sporadically at people's houses. He somehow wound up in my backyard, which is full of trees BTW, and was just shooting in every direction. I can still vividly remember brake lights in the middle of the otherwise pitch black woods and sparks from the gunfire going off in every direction. The cops showed up and shot him to death. Luckily no one was hurt, but my neighbors did find a bullet in the middle of their mattress. Fireworks are not so fun anymore. While living with some friends, I got up late at night to get a drink of water from the kitchen. I didn't turn on any lights, having no trouble navigating in the dark. As I crossed through the living room, I heard some movement type noise or something and assumed it was one of my roommate's pet cats. Go to the kitchen, drink water, and leave the kitchen. On my way back through the living room, I hear movement noises a lot louder than an old cat should make, and I glance around. There on the couch, in the very dark living room, is a shape, roughly child-sized, with bright red eyes staring directly at me. I froze. The fear was so sudden and strong that it is giving me goosebumps now. I very slowly stepped backward, not daring to even blink as I watched the red orbs watch me. After several agonizingly long seconds, I reached the kitchen light switch, ready to defend myself when this goblin thing was sure to attack me. Click, it was my other roommate's chinchilla. It had opened its cage and escaped from their room. It was sitting on top of a pile of laundry. Home from grad school during Christmas break. Sleep still fucked up from finals, aka caffeine, and worse, overusages, so at 4 a.m., I'm downstairs at my parents' house, reading the original Dracula, Bram Stoker's. When Dracula wants to go to England, he hops on the boat. During the voyage he kills all crewmen, the last of which he lashes at the helm of the boat, the steering wheel gizmo, still steering, though dead. As the boat crashes into the coast of England, dead people don't dock for shit, Dracula changes himself into a dog. He jumps from the boat, and as he lands, a huge bolt of lightning strikes, and much thunder ensues. At that exact moment, a huge bit of thunder and lightning outside my folks' house. December thunderstorms are pretty rare in Midwest, so I levitate from the couch like the lightning had hit me directly in the ass. So freaked out, and probably still a little whacked from finals, that I got a butcher knife from the kitchen and wandered all through the downstairs area, finally going upstairs to my bedroom, with a knife. No idea what I thought I was looking for. If I'd seen a dog, I probably would have stroked out then and there. This is a brief account of an experience I had almost a year ago in the warehouse where I work alone. No one I've told has believed me, but perhaps you all will. I work in a warehouse that my father purchased. He bought it for 25% of its cost from a farmer who seemed very excited to be rid of it. It is in the middle of the Mennonite country, with no neighbors for a half-mile around. Look out the window. You see cornfields and scraggly trees. Cell service? Forget about it. I work here alone, painting and preparing the front office portion for eventual functionality. To get to the front office, you must go through a hallway from the main warehouse, into a secondary office, and then through another door into the front. I frequently hear bumps and thuds and occasionally will go into the warehouse and feel air movement. But I've always attributed it to drafts and animal life on the roof. The only thing that has ever made me uneasy about the building is the fact that all of the door locks are reversed. Whoever installed those locks didn't intend to keep people out, they intended to keep something in. I was in the front office when I began to hear the thudding. I ignored it and continued to apply masking tape to the door I was working on. But this time, it was accompanied by a screeching sound. Not loud, but audible. I was freaked out but convinced myself that it was just a pissed off raccoon or squirrel that had found its way inside. I continued working until I heard the slam. The door to the secondary office had been open. It sounded like it had violently slammed shut. I peeked around the corner and saw that I was right. The secondary door was now closed. I tried to logic it through in my head that a strong draft had sucked it closed, although I knew there was no such draft. The thudding began again. Close this time. I've never been able to put proximity on it, but now it sounded like it was right on the other side of the door. I froze, unsure of what was happening. My eyes locked on the door handle, which began to turn. The door disengaged its latch and slowly swung open. Wider. Wider. Nothing there. Nothing visible, no air movement, just quiet. So quiet. A quiet that seemed to overwhelm me with its presence, a quiet so thick I couldn't breathe. The quiet was shattered when the screech came again. This time, it was human. Pained, angered, and emanating from the main warehouse. The door slammed. That entirely broke my frozen, fearful state. I ran. I got into my car and drove until I was in cell range to call my father. He didn't believe anything about the doors closing but agreed that the building had something weird about it. He told me he'd be right out. Fast forward half an hour. My dad and I met up and drove back to the warehouse. I showed him the door that slammed, showing him that it was separated from both the front office and the main warehouse, so no draft could have closed it. I told him about the thuds, the screeching, and the sudden quiet that overcame the building. He decided that we should check the main warehouse. Emboldened by his presence, I led the way. Something you should know about this warehouse: it was formerly a furniture manufacturing place owned by a Mennonite farmer. They made handmade chairs, tables, etc. Because of all the cutting that went on, the floor is thickly coated with dust. We walked into the warehouse and saw nothing out of the ordinary. The dust was untouched, the doors were closed, and windows were locked. The only thing out of the ordinary was one of the hanging fluorescent light fixtures. It was hanging askew, and swaying slightly. Insisting we take a look at the mount to ensure it didn't just break loose, my dad grabbed a stepladder. He supported it while I climbed up and grabbed the swinging light. I looked on top of the light. And saw a handprint. A single, fresh, inhumanly large handprint. No footprints in the dust around the light, no signs of a presence. I climbed down and switched places with my father. He saw it and said, "What the hell? There's been no one in here for years." He climbed down and told me he'd been suspicious of someone breaking in and stealing parts from the warehouse light system. He couldn't believe me that this wasn't human. That something wasn't right here. The last thing he said was, "Nothing is here. Next time, just go back to work." And then, as if to show its presence, the thud returned. This time it wasn't just a thud, but more of an earthquake. The entire building felt like it moved. The heartbeat-like thud was then overlaid by the screech. The awful, awful screech. It felt it like was coming from the walls themselves. We ran. We ran and I haven't returned. My father hired someone to finish my job and has since moved into the office. He's heard the thudding, but thus far nothing has happened further. What happened? I don't know. Nor do I ever care to know. What I do know is that there is something paranormal in that building and the man who sold it to us knew. I'll never forget the sound of that lock turning by itself or the feeling of the deafening silence. So I had this whistle that was pretty shit. It was super obnoxious, with this terrible, but very distinctive, sound. It was like the death cry of a goose, followed by a rattling noise. It always hung off a bright orange lanyard, which I'd hook on the door handle of my front door. Every morning, I'd get up and see the awful whistle hanging from my door. Now, right next to my front door was a window that didn't quite latch. It wasn't open all the time, but if you pushed on it for long enough, it would give way. One night, it was raining hard as hell. I woke up at 4 a.m. to the sound of banging downstairs. I assumed the wind had blown the window open, and I didn't want the carpet to get soaked, so I got up and went to close it up again. Sure enough, the window was wide open. As I went to close it, I heard something out the window. In the distance, I heard the fucking whistle. It was gone. The lanyard and the whistle were off the handle, and someone was blowing the whistle somewhere out in the storm. I checked the house top to bottom. Nothing else was stolen. Just the whistle. I fixed the window. Hunting with father-in-law. It's well before sunup, maybe 5 a.m., and we hiked to a patch of trees and sat down, him maybe 70 yards south of me with me facing out into a clearing. He had a flashlight and I didn't have one on me at the time. It was so dark you couldn't see a hand in front of your face. After about 20 minutes, I hear something really big walking maybe 10 yards in front of me. From the sound of the leaves/branches breaking, it sounded human-sized. It startled me and I loudly call for my father-in-law to turn on the flashlight. Right in front of me, where the noise was coming from, I hear his voice say, "Nah, it's cool." The noise happened again about 10 minutes later and I called out to him, assuming it was him making the noise. No response, so I made my way over to his camp and asked him if he had just walked near me. He said he hadn't gotten up the whole time and was confused why I would have heard his voice. Skinwalkers, man. Not me, but I was there. About 2 years ago my fiancé and I stayed in a haunted room of a hotel. The story is that a woman committed suicide in the room in the early 20th century after her husband or fiancé died at sea. I don't believe in ghosts and still do not, but she does and claims she has psychic sensitivity. Well, We go to sleep, and frankly, it was one of the best night's sleep I ever had. When I got up in the morning, my fiancée was exhausted. She said the ghost of the woman appeared several times in the night. Each time she would be standing at the foot of the bed, walk to my side, bend down and look at me, then walk out of the room. Years ago, around Halloween, my family had gathered to watch scary movies. My mom loved these shows. My dad didn't care much for them, so he would get up every few minutes to work on something or another. We had started watching Hitchcock's The Birds, and it was getting late, probably close to midnight. And it was getting cold. Not just the late October chill of the foothills we lived in, but the house was getting cold. At first, my mom just asked my dad to turn up the thermostat, but after a couple of minutes of the furnace running and the house not warming up, he realized he'd need to go check the furnace. He grabbed a lighter and headed downstairs. A minute later, we hear him shout for us. "You have to come to see this," he says with something that sounds part excitement, part nervousness in his voice. We get down there to see him shining a flashlight into the furnace. Peering in, first, we just noticed the pilot light was indeed out. Then we saw the reason. A dead bird. Something about the size of the palm of my hand, maybe a sparrow, had flown into the furnace from outside and put the flame out. I grew up in a very haunted house. My parents still live there. Here are a few stories. My room is annexed off of another room. Essentially, you walk up the steps, go straight down the hallway to the door facing you, and walk through that room to get into mine. None of the dogs or cats that we've had will go into my room. One would occasionally peek in and immediately leave. The rest just avoid it completely. In the room before my room, the one at the end of the hall, you can hear someone walk up the steps, walk across the hall, and watch the doorknob turn, and the door open. No one is ever there. This happens when someone witnesses probably once a month. One night I came home around 2 a.m. I was pouring myself a glass of iced tea when someone plain as day sneezed right next to me. I immediately noped the fuck out and left. I got bitched the next day for leaving the refrigerator open. Did not give a single fuck. Sorry, Mom. My brother, his friend, and I were sitting at my kitchen table playing cards. The back screen door opens. Then the inside door opens. My brother and I are like, "Oh hey Sam, come on in." My dad calls the ghost Sam. No idea why. I got up to shut the door, but the deadbolt was out. I had to unlock the door to shut it. My brother's friend immediately left and never came back to our house. The upstairs toilet flushes by itself on occasion. If I'm home alone, the stove will turn on to heat the kettle. I'm alerted by the whistling. This has happened on 4 different occasions. I believe it is my grandmother fucking with me. She would do that. I also smell her on occasion. When I was 8, I was swimming by myself in the pool. Probably not the best parenting by today's standards. My parents have way too much trust and faith in us. Anyway, a shadow man walks in between 2 trees, about 25 feet. I just stared as it walked like a Bigfoot. My mom has also seen several shadow people in the yard and more commonly on the basement steps. When I was little, I was petrified of my room, and I would make up every excuse to stay in my parents' room. My dad used to work nights, so I would sleep in bed with my mom. One night, I woke up and saw a little girl standing in the corner looking out the window. I screamed and she was gone. I scared the shit out of my mom. She believed me because she didn't think I was capable of screaming and shaking like that had I just been faking. Both of my brothers have heard the girl laugh. We have all heard what sounds like people talking in the other room, music playing, and people walking around. We all sleep with our TVs on to drown out the noise. Sometimes I think, fuck, maybe someone broke in, but I've learned that if the dogs aren't barking, don't worry about it. A lot of friends have gotten creeped out with that feeling that someone is watching you. I still get it, but I've gotten used to it. I think the ghost there protects us. There were several times the house should have burnt down. It's an incredibly old house with very old electrical that had burned through the walls in spots. The small wooden slats that make up the walls behind the drywall burn in like 2 seconds. We've renovated a few rooms and replaced the insulation and removed the slats. We used them as tinder in the outdoor fireplace. We also found old medicine bottles on the walls when we renovated the kitchen. 1967 Southeast Asia. Me and 3 guys in my company were set on ambush and left to hold a 3-way crossing in a trail so the rest of the guys could escape on the main ambush. Claymore mines are out and mags are full. I'm high gun with an M14 up on a tree stump over the guys who have the trail. The night drags and everything is making noise, but we have all been in the bush, we know what's up. I ate and had some water and laid back to scan my trail and the trails into the crossing. Now the two guys that are here with me and I are all 1 year in country Marines, not new raw kids. We had all been in fire bases and done the ruck thing. We knew the jungle and how it worked. Things got quiet and we heard a spooky gunship doing her job on the Ho Chi Minnesota Sleep came on my rotation, but I just couldn't shut off. The damn woods were watching me. We all felt the air go electric and hunkered to fight, but it never came, but we couldn't let it go. The air stayed hot. We could feel the air pushing on us like we had steam being blown at us. I thought nervous, but why now? Never happened before? I looked around and iron-sighted and then glassed the valley and trailhead. Nothing moved, nothing so much as breathed. No cigarette cherries or urine smells, no rice smell. Fuck me, what is in the woods with us? I was sweating onto my rifle. I never got like that. I slid down the stump and the two other guys felt it too. We were fucked. The doom was palpable. I popped my bayonet on and tucked my extra pistol in my flak. I wasn't going easy. The air got heavy and hot and we all threw up. I just kept glassing, sure my fucking demise was walking up the hill to me. It never came. 3 more hours went past, the sun rose and we had NVA stragglers who got out of the main ambush come past. I picked a few off the claymores and did the rest. I never felt that again in the woods, but there was no sleep that night. I had posted this in a thread a while ago, but it was late, so not many saw it, so I'll just copy that. So, this happened last summer, 2 summers ago now. We have an old Mercury Grand Marquis that my dad had wanted to buy for years. The owner would never sell it, even though it was just left sitting there. After he died, his daughter sold it to us for pretty cheap, because she knew how bad my dad wanted it. So, one day I drove it to my friend's house on a rainy day to play some Smash Brothers. I left at 10 that night, and it had stopped raining, and I had to drive my friend home. So, this car's radio didn't work, and it would only be static if it was on. Well, I turned down my friend's road, and when I turned, I heard someone say, "Get out." I know it wasn't my friend, because he was talking to me. So, we continued our conversation and I got to his house about 5 minutes later. When we got there, I asked him if he heard something weird when we turned onto the road. He said he heard the same thing I did, and I was freaked the fuck out. This sounds like such a made-up story, but I wish it was. Safe to say I haven't driven that car since.